parenting and reparenting with CPTSD. So very little can make us feel inadequate as parents than going into it having trauma, having our own triggers that are unresolved. For Sheila, she had a son and she loved her son, but she did worry about her ability to parent. In fact, at one point she actually accidentally dislocated her son's elbow. And it wasn't meant, she wasn't trying to be abusive, but they were on a train and the son was really little. And he was complaining like, I want to sit there, I want to sit there, but they couldn't sit in that seat because someone was in that seat. And he was making a scene and she was getting really embarrassed and it was kind of crowded on the train. And so she tried to like, no, tell her son, stop, blah, blah, blah. And the son wouldn't stop. The son keeps throwing a fit. No, I want that seat. I want that seat. I want that seat. And so finally she's like, okay, just, here, let's look at this story. So she tried to tell a story to her son and the son's just like having a meltdown. And, her glasses are falling off of her face. She's trying to carry bags. She's holding on to this rail in the train. They're standing up. So it's just a really unideal circumstance. There's a lot of stress, but what made this especially hard for her is it was triggering for her son to be embarrassing her in front of all these people. So now in her mind, she's saying, all these people hate us. They're probably thinking something bad about us. They're all judging me right now. And then her son has a complete meltdown, falls on the floor and starts flailing about. So finally, she just uses her strength and pulls her son up and holds him in the death grip until they're finally off the train. And the son just got quiet. But later on that night, she realized he might have gotten injured because he wasn't using his arm. And so she took her son to the doctor, and sure enough, it turned out she dislocated her son's elbow. And they showed her how to fix it, and they reassured her. But of course, she felt terrible. She felt guilty. She felt like a bad parent for this. So she had to learn some practical techniques that she could use in working with her child, so she didn't have to default to being triggered, feeling dysregulated as she felt at that time, and could ultimately find a way to, if you will, keep her son under control when her son's going out of control and she herself is feeling out of control. And so we're going to talk about some of the techniques that she learned and how you can apply those techniques as well. Now, here's the thing. Even if you don't have children, this talk is for you, because when we're healing from complex trauma, we are reparenting the self. When we're healing from complex trauma, it is all about parenting. You are parenting an inner child. So everything you've learned up until this point in my healing course and working with me and watching the videos on YouTube has been about parenting. But I've just geared it toward parenting yourself. So those of you who have asked for a program or a talk on parenting, you already have it. If you go back to the information and you just reapply it from, oh, this is what I need to do for me, to this is what I need to do for my children, you have the parenting advice, because parenting and reparenting, it's all one and the same. It is our responsibility after we age out of our parents' care to care for ourselves. It is our responsibility to care for ourselves. The inner child that we are is still there. And we need to be raising and protecting that inner child all the time for the rest of our lives. We need to be raising and protecting that inner child for the rest of our lives. So we need to use the right principles, the right ways of thinking. So as a matter of philosophy, please, if you have children, recognize that if there's two, there's really three. And if there's three, there's really four. That extra person is you. If you have children, Recognize that you are one of your children. If you're listening to this broadcast and you don't have children, recognize you do have a child to care for. Yes, that is you. Your inner child is who you need to care for. Is that clear? We want to make sure everyone really grasps this. This talk is for you. Reparenting and parenting are one and the same. You are always parenting at least one child, and that inner child is you. Even in your healed state, you still have the inner child. You still have a vulnerable soul that needs to be protected, that needs to be coddled, that needs to be helped and taught, that needs to be guided. And it is your job to soothe and care for and guide and protect and advocate for your inner child. That's your responsibility. So however many children you have, add one. There's a +1 on everything. Because when you are caring for your children, you need to care for yourself on the same level. If you're making them food, you need to make yourself food as well. If you're going to take care of their recreational needs, you need to take care of your own recreational needs as well. Does that make sense? That is what self-love is. Because it's like, okay, how am I supposed to love myself? What does that mean? Do I take myself to the spa? It means that you care for yourself just like you're a child, just like you're one of your kids. Just a little love. That's what self-love is. You care for yourself just like you are one of your kids. Like you love yourself. Imagine that. It's a novel idea. Care for yourself like you love yourself. So let's take a look at some actual situations that we run into as parents that can help us to improve our skills as parents, right? When you are a parent, you are in a position of authority. When we are trauma survivors, we struggle with authority. We may buck against authority. We may be too submissive and subservient to authority, i.e. the fawn response, right? So how do we manage authority? How do we manage our relationship with authority? Parenting is all about balance. Good parenting is all about balance, right? So we have to get out of the extreme thinking and the extreme actions and get into the balance. The balance is a little bit of both sides, enough so that it equalizes. It's an equal measure on both sides. So when it comes to authority, how can you be a balanced authority figure? Well, we wouldn't want to be an authoritarian, too demanding, and we wouldn't want to be too loose, too lax, too just like, almost neglectful as a parent, right? Letting them do whatever they want and have whatever they want. So how do we strike that balance? And what does it look like if you're too authoritarian? Like parents, for instance, that never let their children go outside to play. Parents that don't allow their children to make friendships or make plans with friends and to socialize. What's happening here is they're being too authoritarian. So you're being too authoritarian when your exercise of authority goes beyond what's for the good of the target or those under your care, and it goes as far as to be self-serving or detrimental to those you're caring for. That's being too authoritarian. When it goes beyond what's for the good of the target, in this case, the child, and it's actually become detrimental to that person or self-serving. So can you see how a parent that doesn't allow its children to foster other relationships with other kids has really gone beyond a balanced level of protection for the child, but is actually impairing the child, so it's now to the child's detriment? Or they may be doing it for self-serving reasons, like they don't want that child to learn things or to lose control over that child. Does that make sense? So that's where we have to look at ourselves. We got to strike that balance. Now, we do need to be authoritative as parents, which means to step up into your position and guide your child. So we don't want to be on the other extreme. Whatever my child tells me, that's what it is. Whatever my child wants, that's what he gets. No, that wouldn't be preparing the child properly. And if you don't discipline a child, that is a form of neglect. That's not loving the child. It is the opposite. If you don't discipline a child, that is a form of neglect. So you see how we need a balance? So we need discipline, but not to be overly controlling or authoritative or authoritarian. So what can we do if our children are having intrusive thoughts? Or maybe they have bad memories about before this talk when we weren't really great parents, or before our healing journey and we've made some mistakes. What can we do about that? So if your children are expressing negative thinking or intrusive thoughts about themselves, it is your job to guide the child in their way of thinking and the way they view the world and the way they view themselves. It's your job to guide the child in the way they view the world and the way they view themselves. So if the thoughts are detrimental to themselves, then you need to correct those thoughts. If they're expressing a worldview or a view of themselves that's detrimental, you need to correct the thoughts of the child, such as the child says, I'm ugly, I'm not worthy, or no one likes me, or I'll never be anything, or I'll never find anyone. You need to correct that thinking. No, my daughter, you're lovable, you're wonderful, you're beautiful. Don't say that. That's not true. Think about this, and you're giving them evidence. Think about the time you did this. Think about that, right? Helping to instill in them that their worth is intrinsic. Helping to show them they have talent, abilities, potential, aptitudes. Pointing that out, showing evidence. Likewise, you must do that for yourself. When you are having intrusive thoughts, you need to correct the negative thinking. You need to correct the negative thinking. When we think detrimental thoughts, it's not good for us, so we correct that and we say, no self, no inner child. You are wonderful. You are lovable. You are beautiful. Think about this. Think about this time that you accomplished this and that. We remind ourselves, your worth is intrinsic. It cannot be removed from you. It is not based on what you do or what you accomplish or what someone else is doing to you or how they're treating you. Your worth is intrinsic. You were born with it. We're telling ourselves that. We're correcting the intrusive thoughts. That's re-parenting. We need to guide us as well as guide our children. If they're having memories of bad times or they have a lack of trust for you based on some legitimate mistakes or abuse in your past, be patient. Demonstrate over a sustained period of time that you are changed, that you have a new way of thinking, believing, and acting. It is okay to apologize, but we don't need to be overly apologetic. So own up, take responsibility for what wasn't right, and change it. The actions are more important than the words. Change the actions, make the actions align with what a healthy relationship looks like so that it will model for the child, well, this is what a healthy person does. Here's how a healthy person acts. And there's still time. If your child is a minor, there's still time to model for them what it looks like when a person overcomes abuse and trauma, what it looks like when a person heals, so that they can play that out in their own life, so that they can recognize that in their partners. So what about if our child is dealing with nightmares, flashbacks? What do you do? Well, of course, you're going to soothe the child, right? And your child becomes scared, becomes frightened. Nightmares are a direct result of living in anxiety. So if the child's having anxiety, we're going to help to soothe that anxiety. How do we do that? By helping them to see things in a way that is logical, by asking questions to learn more about why they're thinking that way, and helping to correct improper thoughts or detrimental ways of thinking. Likewise, for the self, you're going to notice that you're having anxiety and it's producing insomnia or nightmares for you. And so you're going to go in and you're going to logically flush out and work out the issues that are causing you anxiety. And you can do this using the JOT method. Notice that in the JOT method, it is a reparenting. Look at how you talk to yourself in the JOT method. Okay, what's bothering me? On a scale of 0 to 4, how much anxiety am I experiencing? And why does that bother me? And why is that so important to me? Same way you would talk to your child. And why does that bother you? And why is that so important to you? And then when you expose the improper way of thinking, the childish thought, or in our case, we call it a cognitive distortion, then you recognize that distortion and you fight against it by giving advice as if you were giving it to another person. You say, hey, no, that's not true. That's not accurate. That's not helpful. This is what's true. This is what's beneficial to you. And then you give yourself this beautiful pep talk and it allays the anxiety. It is a form of self-soothing. And so likewise, that's how you're going to go in with your child. You're going to talk to them about it and you're going to give them soothing and encouragement to help them to have courage and not live in fear. The same rules apply to both our child and how we handle our inner child. If they have things they're afraid of, i.e. triggers, the monster in the closet, a good parent goes into the closet, they turn on the light in the closet, they say, hey, look, there's nothing in here. They move all the clothes around. They show with logic, with the light of truth, there's nothing to be afraid of. And so likewise, when we have triggers, we need to use exposure therapy on ourselves. When we're afraid of monsters in the closet, we need to go up to whatever it is that we're having a fear of, and we need to touch it, and we need to hold it until we feel regulated and get through the exposure, re-imprinting it on the subconscious mind as something that is not scary. It's a form of self-soothing, exposure therapy. The same way we would help a child to get over a fear. That's how we must help ourselves. It's amazing your instincts as a parent because you knew that. You knew that how to help a child to get over their fear. That's what we must use to get over our triggers. Our triggers are sensitivities. Children get emotionally dysregulated just like we do, right? Children get emotionally dysregulated. And they're crying and they're doing too much at the wrong time. How do we handle the dysregulation? Well, remember the boy on the train? He's embarrassing his mother. He's flailing about. He's doing the temper tantrum over really nothing. And the mother, she kind of lost it. She grabbed him really hard and she actually ended up hurting the child. She didn't mean to hurt the child, but she ended up hurting because she was dysregulated, because she was embarrassed, because she was being self-conscious, because she was being other people conscious, and she was mind reading and assuming that she understood what everyone else was thinking. And so it's all just a big negative loop. We got to get out of that. So what are our tools for handling emotional dysregulation? Well, a tool that she learned for parenting is counting. 1, 2, to the child. And then when you get to that number, I recommend 5, you enforce a consequence, a serious consequence. Balanced, not so harsh that it's too much, not that serious, but proportionate to what the situation is. And in turn, the child then learns that, oh, there's a consequence at the end of this number countdown situation. And that number countdown gives the child an opportunity to change the way they're acting and to avoid the consequence. Do you get how this works? When you count for a child, it gives them an opportunity to understand this is how much time left I have before a consequence comes. And it helps them to make a wiser decision. If you just do the no questions asked on site, and you're just striking the child immediately when you get upset, then the child doesn't get an opportunity to avoid the consequence. So they either have to be hypervigilant all the time, worried about when the next hit is coming, or they just feel like, well, there's no point. So then they just act up all the time and they just invite it because how can they stop something they don't ever know when it's coming? See, that doesn't work. So counting actually works for helping the child. And so what this woman did with her child is the next time he was having a meltdown, she said, okay, I'm going to count to 3. And if you don't get up off of the floor, by the time I get to 3, we're not going to watch the movie. They were at Finding Nemo. She wanted to see the movie, by the way, but she laid down the consequence. It was a reasonable one, but a tough one. And so she started counting. And she was really hoping her kid would get off the floor. 1, she said. And he's 2, 3. The child didn't get up off the floor. And she said, okay, I'm going to have to enforce the consequence. I'm returning these movie tickets and we're not going to see the movie. And her child, no, 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 mommy, no, 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 please, 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 please. And she dragged him up to the ticket counter and she returned the tickets, much to her own dismay. And the child's, no, 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 mommy, no. Oh, oh, no. Good at you. Right. And then she followed through with the consequence and they drove home. And much to her surprise, by the time they got home, the child was like fine. He was like re-regulated. It's like, what is this? Children appreciate firm boundaries and rules. And when you show that you will follow through on reasonable consequences, they appreciate that level of predictability that gives them some space to act within and to make decisions properly within. And so lo and behold, she never had to enforce another consequence outside of 3 seconds. Because from then on, when she would count 1, 2, kid would act. Imagine that. So in your case, you may have to enforce the consequence more than one time, but eventually the child does learn, okay, at the end of this, mom or dad is serious. So I have this amount of space to get my act together. Now I recommend 5 seconds because it takes 5 seconds for the cerebral cortex to fire up. When the child is doing all the acting up, they're in the dysregulation, they're in the amygdala. That's where children are at first. So we're teaching them, you got to get out of the amygdala, you got to get into your cerebral cortex, buddy, because I can't continue to deal with you for the rest of your life doing all of this. And so you say to the child, okay, I'm counting to 5. You got 5 seconds to get it together. And you can either count down 5, 4, 3, 2, or you count 1, 2, and what you're really doing is the rule of 7 seconds. When you're stretching that 5 out to about 7, it's a nice slow 1, 2, 3. And guess what? That child's mind fires up and they start really thinking about it. And they go, I'm going to hurry. I'm going to get up. I'm not going to wait for the end of this 5 seconds. It is an amazing tool. And it gives people an opportunity to think and to work. So be firm, have reasonable consequences, follow through, never back down on your own word so that your children can learn to respect you and to respect your word and what you say. But for yourself, you must use the rule of 7 seconds as well, which means before you act, before you go into the amygdala, you just pause. You stay still and you count. 1, 2, 3. Your first thought is, I'm going to rip this guy's head off. But by the time you get to 7, you got something more reasonable, such as, that guy might be having a bad day. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go get in my car and go home. Rule of 7 seconds helps you to regulate your emotions, helps your children as well. So what about when your children are having problems at school with relationships? Again, with the extremes, they may be the type to go and get bullied, or they may be the type to go and become bullies. And so either way, we have to teach them what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, right? And so you got to sit down with your children and you have to help them to understand how to interact with people so that they are standing up for themselves, i.e. not being bullied, not becoming people pleasers, and that they need to not try to manipulate and take advantage of others, i.e., not becoming a bully, right? And so, likewise with yourself, you need to get out of all of the unhealthy manipulation, toxic manipulation, and you need to speak up, be assertive, speak up for yourself, set boundaries so that you're not being a people pleaser. This means to say no. This means to let people down. This is how you care for yourself. This is how you reparent yourself. Just like you're talking to a child. You say to them, hey, listen, if those kids come up to you and they want you to do this inappropriate thing, you say to them, no, that's not me. That's what you tell them. And that's what you tell yourself too. Same thing. Hey, when your family, when your friends, when everybody's pressuring you to do something you don't want to do, you say, no, thank you. That's not a very me thing to do. Or that's not going to work for me. And let it be that. You're becoming a greater parent already. I can feel it. What about with shame, guilt, self-blame? Abusive parents use toxic shame against their child. Toxic shame is nobody's going to like you. No man's going to marry you when you look like that. That's toxic shame. Making someone feel like they are wrong, they're not good enough. It's inappropriate. It's never appropriate to use toxic shame on a child. It's never appropriate to use toxic shame to yourself. I repeat, it's never appropriate to shame yourself in a toxic manner like that. No one's going to like me. No one's going to marry me. I'm just not fit for society. I'm less than human. Don't shame yourself. It's never appropriate. It's never appropriate. Abusive parents weaponize guilt against their children. They weaponize the guilt. It's not wrong to say to your child, that hurts me. Or you really hurt your father when you said that. If it's true, it's true. It's real. But we wouldn't want to try to weaponize the guilt to try to control the children. Does that make sense? Like, making them feel like they need to worry about everybody else over themselves. Some abusive parents will weaponize guilt by saying things like, I had to quit college to take care of you. I dropped out of college and now I've missed out on opportunities in my life. And and just make you feel so guilty for just being alive as a child. That's weaponizing the guilt against a child. Don't do that. Don't weaponize guilt against children. That's abuse. It's toxic. Instead, give children a basis of understanding the world, understanding there's consequences, but give them forgiveness. Children need to learn that you forgive them when they do something wrong, that you let things go. And then they learn for themselves, oh, it's okay for me to let things go when I do something wrong. It's okay for me to forgive myself because I've been forgiven. I get forgiven. That's a normal thing. And it's okay then for me to forgive others. So help them to learn forgiveness by you modeling forgiveness in the way you treat the child. And that's the same thing with blame, like not putting all of the blame on them. Help children to learn not to blame others, right? A lesson you might say, when you're pointing the finger at someone else, you got 3 pointing back at you. But you're trying to help the child to understand that you don't want to be that type of person that's always pointing the finger or trying to find someone to blame. And likewise, you don't want the child to learn to blame themselves for everything. Oh, it's my fault that mommy and daddy got divorced. No, you have to correct that thinking. It is not your fault. This is grown-up business happening over here. It has nothing to do with you. Before you were even born, there were issues between mommy and daddy. So that has nothing to do with you. Help them to understand the world doesn't revolve around them. It's healthy for them to learn that. Hopefully these suggestions are helpful to you in your efforts to parent a child, but also to reparent the self. If you have a child who has difficulty concentrating, difficulty learning, don't reprimand the child and yell at the child. Pay attention. Why aren't you paying attention? Why can't you learn this? We don't learn under those circumstances. And if anything, we become more dissociated, more dysregulated when we're being yelled at. It doesn't open up our under stress. We don't learn well under stress. That's just how humans are. So if we would not yell at a child for not being able to pay attention, then don't beat yourself up for having attention deficits at times. The reality is, the reason you can't pay attention sometimes is because it's kind of boring. So beating yourself up because something is a little boring to you is not helpful. And sometimes we just become distracted by things we're thinking or other things that are going on. So beating yourself up, I have attention deficit. I'm never going to be able to. No, it's not helpful. So for a child to try to make things interesting, you make things a game. Do that for your inner child as well. You can make things a game. You can use timers. So don't just beat yourself up like you are inadequate and you're just not good enough. We want to be kind to our children. We want to be kind, generous, reasonable, approachable, and be kind to yourself as well.